Silence.
Okay, this webinar is being recorded. Right, there we go.
And we're off.
We're off. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming along to our hour with you. Possibly it might go longer, you know what we're like. And we're just going to go around and we'll introduce ourselves, and then we'll share a little bit more about our stories. We'll also talk a little bit about how we arrived here in this space with you of childlessness, and we will talk about how we've tackled networking, starting with corporate networking, Yammer and all those strange places that happen, how we've been affected by the networking in our childlessness community or childless community, and then how we're tackling that as business owners as well and entrepreneurs in our own fields too. And throughout, please ask any questions you like. There's no kind of breaks for that. Just ask us, something pops into your head, and at a convenient point we'll pause and we'll answer that question if we can, or give you any direction. If we can't, we probably know someone who can, and we will endeavour to answer that for you separately if we need to. So, Sarah, Karen, one of you want to go with your introduction first?
I'll go if you like. I'll go. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Sarah. I am 1/3 of the podcast, the Full Stop podcast, along with Berenice. I'm almost exclusively with our community. I also own another business as well, which is kind of from my former life in financial services. So I'm self-employed, I guess an entrepreneur, would you call it that? I don't know. But yeah, so that's kind of my work side. And I guess on my private life, how I came to be part of this community. For those of you that don't know, I had endometriosis stage 4, which unfortunately left me unable to have children. And then I developed another condition called adenomyosis, which is kind of like endometriosis, but it forms in the muscular lining of the womb. And that ultimately led me to having a hysterectomy. So I kind of knew that I was childless, but unfortunately hadn't entirely accepted it, if I'm honest. And then the hysterectomy came along and sort of threw me into a complete tailspin. And it's very much been a case of rebuilding myself from there, which is kind of why I left the financial services. It was okay, it was interesting, it's why I've kind of kept it going, but actually my passion is the counselling and working with the community, the podcasts and the mental health hub. All of that stuff is kind of where my passion lies. So that's why I go out and about networking. So yeah, that's me. Hello everyone, lovely to see you all here.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and also thank you, Berenice, and of course Steph for organising this all, because without Steph, my gosh, where would this week be? Probably non-existent. So big hands up for Steph there from me. And me, I am Karen Enfield de Vries, and hi everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I am from the Netherlands. I live in Belgium. I'm married to an Englishman, and I am childless, not by choice, by circumstance, as a consequence of a diagnosis of cervical cancer at the age of 33, which last June was exactly 10 years ago. So I've been navigating my way through my childless life for a decade now, and those of you who do know me, I've been working with Gateway Women up until earlier this year. I was the operations director there. So I also know a lot about networking within the childless community. But in parallel to the work I used to do for Gateway Women, I also worked in the corporate world as a business transformation manager, a change management consultant. So throughout my career, which spans about 22 years in the corporate world, I became a childless person. So it was really interesting, and that's also something we will talk about today on this call, is how I went from networking as a non-parent in the workplace, but not yet in the childless space, to being a childless employee in the workplace, where the people around me went off on a different path, and I was thrown on this path that I had to navigate my way through. So I found that navigating, coming from a different perspective of my own, was rather tricky and really interesting. So that's why I'm really happy to be here with Sarah and Berenice today to talk about that. And for those of you who don't know me, and if you do, I have been, like I said, worked with Gateway Women, and since July this year, I am now the proud owner of Pure Transformations, which is a grief and loss coaching and counseling. Grief and loss counseling, coaching and consultancy practice. So I'm also a self-employed entrepreneur, and also from that perspective, how do I navigate networking now in this position, in this role, within the childless community, but also with new clients or with new peers, with other colleagues that I'm coming to meet across the way as I venture off on this new journey that I've just embarked on. So it's really fascinating. It's a fascinating topic, and I'm really pleased to be here. So thank you all for jumping on today, and lovely to be here with you, Sarah, and with you, Berenice.
Thank you. Well, probably most of you know me from working with Sarah. If you know the full stop, then I'm the kind of the creative one in the background that does the website and the writing-y stuff and the designy stuff. And that's kind of where I come from. I run Hello Lovely, which is a design company, and that's where I inhabit the world of business networking, which is kind of why I'm sort of here today. So my background and why I'm here in this childless space is through failed IVF and miscarriages. And that has been about 10 years ago now that I had the last loss, and I'm sort of still up and down on the grief scale as it is. It's difficult. I sort of live with it, but grief is never linear, is it? And sometimes we can get these triggers that just pop up when we least expect them. I worked in corporate for a long time. I was freelance for a bit. Then I went back to corporate. I was made redundant from my job in a big London publisher. And with my redundancy pay, thought, maybe I want to get another job. That ended actually my IVF journey in the end, because actually without secure employment, I didn't think we could go through all of that. And of course, the maternity leave thing becomes so difficult to navigate as a freelancer and a business owner. I had an interview for a really lovely job in London, came back to Cambridge where I live, and saw a master's degree being advertised outside one of the universities here, and thought, I'm going to go and do that. So that's what I ended up doing. And that naturally kind of led to me going part-time and then contract work and doing Hello Lovely. So my life kind of changed quite dramatically. And an awful lot of that was driven by the fact that around me, I had lots of kind of assumptions about the fact that the IVF would work. Navigating IVF in a workplace was ridiculous because I was commuting at the time, so I had to make sure I got home at a certain time to do certain things with needles, as anyone who has been through that knows. Plus I'm also standing on the train in a state of absolute agony, so lots of stuff happening there, but also doing all of that, trying to get home and trying to do those things, meant that what became quite a private thing became quite public, because colleagues were saying, well, why are you leaving early then? What's that got to do? You should be working, that sort of thing. And then when you say so, they expect it to work, because of course the success story is more popular than the fact that actually for 72% of people IVF fails. And then of course there's no policy in place to help people. So a lot of the work that I've been doing in the last few years has been around diversity, equality and inclusivity and belonging. That's important to me. I'm now a peer-to-peer trainer and also a mental health advocate for various companies, including some work within Cambridge University too, and the fertility policies that they have in place now too, to make sure that the next generation and my peers are supported much better if they are childless, not by choice, but also if they're going through fertility treatment. And busting a few of those myths is quite something that I'm passionate about. So that's my nutshell of a story here. And of course, you'll find me on the Full Stop podcast with Michael and with Sarah each month too. That was quite a lot to churn out, isn't it? So any questions from anybody? I was going to invite any questions. If anyone's got anything they'd like us to specifically cover, if you want to pop them in the Q&A, please do so at any time during this conversation that we're having. It's very much a conversation, I think. Should we talk a bit about Workplace networking. Should we start off with corporate stuff? Because I don't know if anybody would like to say if they're working corporate with you running your own business, either in the chat or in the Q&A, then please do so. I'm just kind of curious, but I'm sure that quite a few people have had those experiences of Teams and Yammer, and emails, work emails. Oh, God.
Yeah, so please, everyone who's listening, and if you're watching this, feel free to drop it in the chat, actually, and just drop in the chat that you know, whether you are working as a self-employed person, whether you might also not be working at the moment for whatever reason, you might find yourself in a corporate environment. Just drop it in the chat. We would love to hear kind of where you're at.
Oh, fantastic, Bindi, thank you. If you would like us not to read out your question, then please say so. But questions about networking within the childless community, what's out there at the moment, and ideas for the future. Ooh, okay. We'll come back to that perhaps when we get to that part of what we're talking about. But definitely one that we can answer, and possibly Sarah and I can share a few thoughts as well.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think
Okay, so yeah, lots of people teaching self-employed in Spain. Okay.
I think there's a real, having worked in corporate and then moved out to self-employment, I think there's a real difference when you're in the corporate environment. The expectations around discussions and what is okay to bring into the workplace, very much, in my experience, hinged around bonding over families and the like. It was almost seen as safe territory, and, you know, because you have to have that sort of persona. I found working in corporate, you couldn't just bring your whole self to work. You know, sweary Sarah, not allowed, but Sarah talking about certain topics, you know, family and things like that, even though I didn't have one, that was kind of seen okay. And that was fairly, you know, there was a point, like Karen, where I was not childless, I was trying. And so I think that shift from having that hope and feeling actually, okay, I'm on the edges, but I am still on the edges, to then actually, no, I'm nowhere near, was, I found, very difficult to navigate. Yeah. I had nothing, nothing to talk about. And it really affected me. How did you find it?
I found it very, very, very hard. And especially because I was, the company I was working for at the time, I'd been with for a good 4 years. So I kind of joined that company in my late 20s, kind of like 27, I think I was. So that's an age where you are kind of like your kind of first job post uni. You know, you've kind of built up a little bit of a reputation and a name for yourself. I was working for about 6 years by then, and so I've kind of built up. Built up a reputation, but I was also at a, you know, I was growing on the career ladder. Let me put it that way, and I was happy to do so. But also, I was surrounded with people who were in that same boat. We were all kind of the team I was part of. We're a young, enthusiastic, driven bunch of people. You know, I think a couple of us had a couple of my colleagues then had children, but they were slightly in the older age bracket. They were already in their kind of early to mid 30s. So we had a massive group of people around us, around me, who were just living life, working hard, and, you know, and we were having conversations about everything and anything, but we weren't in the parent kind of demographic yet. Of course, when we talked there, because we met people, we met partners, some of us bought our first house. I bought my first house when I was 25. And so we were kind of moving into that adulthood kind of phase of life, and such. And so the conversations at work and the networks that I was part of were very much about equality in the workplace, diversity in the workplace. I worked for international companies, so I traveled a lot. So it really was kind of easy for me to be in that environment. Then I got ill. So already that was a huge, gosh, I would say eye-opener, revelation, shock, maybe even, to become a patient within that group of co-workers that I was working with. Because of already, you know, the moment the word cancer drops, and especially at a young age. I was 31 when I first got diagnosed. That shifts already everything. Then, of course, as I was going through medical treatments and eventually having to undergo surgery and learning that I would be permanently involuntary childless at the age of 33, that kind of puts you on a whole different level, because by then, some of my colleagues that I mentioned before, the 3-4 years prior to all of this happening, we were so strongly connected. We were having fantastic networks that we were all part of. I was part of a women's network. Of course, that women's network kind of filtered out to become a mum's network. And of course, I came back to work and it's like, oh, well, what network is out there for me? Because it became very quiet around me when I came back in the workplace. And now those of you who know me, Sarah, Bernice, anybody's watching who knows me, I'm not a quiet person. I am not a wallflower. I'm a very extroverted person. I speak openly about, I wear my heart on my sleeve, basically. I speak openly about where I'm at, what's happening and stuff. And for that to shift so dramatically in a relatively short period of time with people who I thought were really kind of like, you know, dear valued co-workers, it was really hard to kind of come back into the workplace from having left it as, you know, oh, I'm not feeling too great, to becoming a cancer patient, and then also coming back as an ex-cancer patient who is now also never going to have children. Whew. Yeah, that was really hard, because simply people don't know how to act around me. But also, I couldn't find the right network in the workplace for me, because the women's network, like I said, had kind of gradually shifted into a mum's network. I have a lot to say about that, but I'll leave that for a later moment on the call. But even also other professional networks I was a part of, I just couldn't find that connection.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's very true. I found that people didn't know what to say after, because when you start to sort of share your story and you talk about, maybe tentatively, even just a little bit, people just wriggle with discomfort and walk away, I think, from that, whether it's childlessness, whether in your situation, what do you say to someone who's been through cancer as well? There's, I don't know, might get it wrong, but actually sometimes getting it wrong, at least you've made the effort. But it's really, really hard, isn't it? I think I've kind of experienced companies that have been different sizes. I work for a very small company, but a very intense company with mostly around advertising, ex-Fleet Street, very little empathy about anything. Ex-Fleet Street salespeople are not known for their patience at all. It's very high powered, very high stressed, and that wasn't particularly healthy. And then I went back into having been in life of publishing, went back into publishing. Publishing is notorious, I think, for having very female dominated environment. And just looking through the chat and people talking about working in care environments, again, female dominated, publishing so much the same. There's a whole kind of thing about, you know, very female led, go in, there's lots of support and networking around parents. It's kind of expected that, you know, 70% of the workforce will go off on maternity leave. Baby showers tend to be very frequent in publishing, and of course those networks start to then become quite difficult in terms of tackling it if you don't fit in, or you tend to find, I found certainly from my personal story, that because IVF was accepted as working, that I was already part of that network, which of course I'm not. No, really, I haven't got to that place yet. You know, you kind of know it, and I think the further I went through all of that and got to sort of round 5, I thought, okay, this isn't quite working out. And in smaller companies, there's less places to hide. I think in bigger company, it was almost sometimes easier in bigger publishing companies, but certainly in the agency, I worked with a team actually in the building of around 15, and in a quite small environment, and one woman got pregnant as I was literally miscarrying and came in with the baby cake, and it was kind of sort of, interestingly, I had more support from the other design manager who worked alongside me. So I was managing all the sales, managing all the editorial team and all the design team at the time. I actually got demoted whilst I was working there because they all assumed I would go unhinged on the drugs as well. So there was a kind of, it was odd, that kind of pulling apart, or the assumption that I would also be going off the rails because someone knew someone who had been through IVF who also went a bit off the rails, but everyone's individual. But I found it easier sometimes to actually work in those male-dominated environments than I did in the female-dominated ones. Although the stress was much higher, I wouldn't go back to that, but publishing was quite hard. I think it still is. And just trying to keep, to actually remain professional when actually, you know, in some ways, the smaller ex-Fleet Street environment meant that I could bring sweary Berenice. You know, swearing was actually kind of part of that environment. In publishing and in lots of environments that I've worked in, it's very soft. And people don't tend to say what they think. So I have to remember not to do that. But there are times often when I have gone, hang on a second, this is wrong. And the more I've done around the inclusivity training, and in fact, one of the things that popped up was icons for networks recently. And of course, as a designer, I'm kind of like nerdy about the icon thing. In fact, actually, generally, as a designer, I hate icons, but that's another story. But the icon for caring, and it's a diversity and inclusivity and belonging training, had a baby in it. And hang on a minute, you are delivering the training here, and that's wrong. And I'm saying something, of course I did. And you need to change this. In fact, I just dumped the icons because if they need to explain what they are, they're not working. But also just that lack of inclusivity. And I just want to briefly touch on, slight digression, but also I think we hear an awful lot about training environments too. I've certainly been on mental health training courses, and yeah, there's a lot going on there about, as a parent, and actually someone recently, only 6 months ago, no, a year ago, I think it was actually had been through IVF successfully twice and was trying to tell me on a mental health part about empathy, how I ought to be with their clinic. So yeah, there's thing. Yeah, I know.
Goodness,
really, you should. You know, I'm thinking, my time has passed, but this is inappropriate. This is inappropriate. But again, it's really hard because sometimes you don't want to say something, but often networking in companies can mean that you have your name attributed to something in these digital environments. So, for example, Yammer. It's got your name attached to it. So if you say something, you're like there, like just like all our digital footprints, you're like, you're there. You know, and you think, oh, do I want to be that person? And that's a bit of a big thing to ask, I think, of everybody, which I think is where World Childless Week's so great, because you can kind of put something up, but it's not necessarily you. It's something you've seen as an awareness week, perhaps.
Yeah. But I think that's part of the problem, isn't it? I mean, I'm kind of very sat with you two are very open, and this is me. Hello. But actually, I'm quite introverted. So I wasn't ready to share my story in the corporate environment. I kind of like the fact that I could compartmentalize it and leave it at the door, I hoped, into what I presumed was a fairly safe environment. So when I came back from a miscarriage, having to discuss that with a male, my boss, who was male, who had children, had never had any problems, was incredibly triggering. And it's like, right, I will do it in that tiny little compartment over there, but then the rest of the time I just want to be able to just leave it at the door and carry on. But actually you don't get that luxury of doing that, because they go, oh, well, at the weekend I was doing this, and and you know, how many, you get all those triggering bingo questions, don't you? So how many kids do you do? You know, nice to meet you, never met you before, let's talk about the lazy stuff. And I think that is the struggle, is that the presumption is that it's safe. When you find out it isn't, that's the difficult bit. And I think for me, trying to work my way up the corporate ladder when actually I was feeling quite messy, and actually, do I still want to be here, was one of the parts that saw me shift. You know, I was on the outside looking in, and then I was like, I can't do it anymore. I'm not interested. And I question how many people, unfortunately, fall out of that because of the impact that the childlessness has on them. It's,
I think that number is huge, and it's been said before, and I will say it here again. I think childlessness is one of the biggest diversity issues in the workplace that
Yeah.
most HR managers have never heard of.
Yeah,
Invisible,
exactly. Yeah.
invisible.
And that because because we are invisible. And of course, it's also what the example you just gave, Sarah, is that, you know, you are an introverted person. You didn't feel safe to speak up. The environment that you found yourself in didn't feel a safe space. Then had you had a network community within your workplace, for example, for women at the workplace, that's where that was my go-to network within the corporate world. And like I said, I'm an extrovert. I do wear my heart on my sleeve, but also I had to overcome that threshold and the shame and the feelings of ambiguity that I felt around, like, oh gosh, if I want to say something about it, I have to go really personal.
Yeah.
And, you know, I used to always kind of filter. I was still loud and I was present, but that was because I knew what I was talking about, work related. But now this was something so personal. It's like, oh, do I still want to be as loud, or do I still want to be the person who puts herself out there? Also in these networks, where there, like I said, I chose women's networks to really talk, because for me, that felt that was my interpretation, that would be a safe environment for me as a woman to step into, and to also to kind of have in the hope that there would be an understanding of, hey, I'm a woman in this workplace, regardless of my family unit status. And so I also always educate people, like, hey, if you don't, stop asking if people have children, ask them about their family unit. What does your home life look like? And so that's already a different question to ask when you come into a new situation or a new network. But my discovery was as well, and the chat is really picking up on this as well, is that most of those women's networks, you know, are focusing on, oh, can we have a breastfeeding room at the office? Can we make sure that there are flexible hours for working mothers? And it's like, well, and all the topics on the agenda of one of the first meetings that I went to for a women's network were all related to that. And I was like, what about the prospects of women in the working place? How do we get peer-to-peer support? Who are female role models within this company that I can connect with, that I can look up to, or that I can learn from to help myself in my professional capacity? And you know, and of course, don't get me wrong, anybody who's watching this, I'm not against parents in the workplace. I am very much a believer that parents and non-parents, so not just childless people, but also people who might choose to be child-free, or people who are not even yet at the age of thinking about starting a family or having a family or whatever, you know, they might not even know what they want yet. You know, they might be of an even younger generation. So there is a whole group that are parents in the workplace, but non-parents in the workplace is also a big mix of diverse demographics from society. And I truly do believe that both those demographics, the non-parents and the parents in workplace, we should, because I don't want to become us versus them.
No.
But what I would love to see is that there becomes a kind of joint collaborative effort. Okay, I'm understanding of your needs, I'm understanding of your needs. So me as a non-parent in the workplace, of course I understand the needs that parents have, because I wanted to be a parent, and I'm a human being. I can think logically, and I can think from an empathetic perspective, that I can understand that you might need to run if you get a phone call, blah, blah, blah. If I get a phone call that my cat is sick, or that my mother has fallen, or whatever has gone on in my life, I also want to be able to run without being asked questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think that getting that message across in the networks that I liaise with, that has been an uphill struggle, to be honest with you, but it's also been a rewarding one, because it has made people sit up and listen.
Yeah, I think that's it. You're trying to get that balance right, so you're not giving too much of yourself away, but actually making sure that people are supported too. The question we've had is around what options are there if your boss and HR are the triggers and do not support your justified issues of equality. My answer to that, it depends on company setups, but I found that one of the biggest areas of change that happens in companies comes from places like gender imbalance networks more than parental ones. I spoke this week, in fact, to York University around their policies, but also again within Cambridge as well, about kind of that, making it as a broader umbrella of gender and balance, and then within that comes childlessness. And often what I found is those networking groups tend to be a little bit smaller and a little bit more diverse, more open to conversation, because they are driving change that's important to them, but also again making sure that people stay in employment, because it's expensive to lose people. 36% of women feel that they're not supported in fertility treatment. I'm not sure what the losses or the figure is, I think, in terms of people just going because of that, of any gender. But just it's expensive losing staff. But I think gender tends to be a little bit, those sorts of people tend to be more kind of more powering forward, I think, and I found much more success with them than I do perhaps with women's networks specifically. Again, one of the things that's popped up in some of the spaces I've noticed is menopause, but of course it's mothers go through menopause, but women go through menopause, actually, please, not just mothers. So I think it's being inclusive, and I think if you can start to get that kind of conversation out around kind of same storm, different boats approach, then I think it then can sort of, and one of the biggest things, it sounds a bit kind of clunky and a bit kind of, I don't know, a bit in your face, but actually the next generation, so our generation, the next generation, and the generations after that, because we can all do better and create a sense of growth, I think, about that too. But I think HR departments need to do a hell of a lot better, because it helps, I think, if you can't go to your manager, finding somebody else who's got the awareness and can be supportive and to be that filter for you is so important. And I'm so sorry that the HR department where you are is not supporting you the way they should do. Katie at Miscarriage Infertility Support Training, who's appeared on the Full Stop podcast, does do training for companies, and I think she's well worth talking to about that too, and looking up what she talked to us on the podcast about, but also her own website too. And I'll find the details, I'll pop them into the chat as well. That's UK based, I'm afraid, for people abroad, but she may well have perhaps other people in her network who can do the same thing in the countries, and she does it all online, so again it might be specific for everywhere, but it's a hard ask.
It is. Go on, Sarah. I want to chime in on that as well, but I would love to hear from you first.
No, you go for it. If you've got a point.
Well, because I gave a presentation on Tuesday to a UK non-profit organization who are all about sustainable transportation across the UK, and I did an hour-long presentation where they did a lunch and learn. They host lunch and learn sessions, and one of their employees is childless, not by choice. I know her personally, and said, Karen, we need to talk about this in my workplace, because this needs to become part of our equality, inclusion, and diversity team, and so that they have an EDI, inclusive equality, diversity, and inclusion team. So if your HR manager doesn't listen, maybe looking within your organization who looks at EDI or DEI. So the abbreviation is used differently across various organizations. But I gave a presentation, just an awareness chat about why it's important to talk about childlessness in the workplace, and it was really well received. They have about 600-700 employees, and nearly a quarter of the company turned up for the talk. It was an online talk, and it was so powerful to actually hear people say, I never even knew that this was an issue. And that for me was like, gosh, fantastic. I love when people actually say things a bit like that, because at first when someone said it, I didn't know it was an issue. I always got a little bit annoyed, like, well, why don't you know? But then I looked at myself prior to becoming a childless employee in the workplace. I wasn't aware of it, to be honest with you, everyone.
No.
Because I had hoped to become a parent. So I knew about maternity leave. I knew about all those things. I knew about the family policies within the workplace, because that's where I thought those were the things I thought I was going to need in a few years from now when I joined the organization. I never bothered to look at, hey, what is their fertility policy? What is their what is their policy for non-parents? I never thought of it. So can I really blame someone who doesn't know this? When I was on my angry stage of my grief journey, oh gosh, I blamed everybody. But now that I'm learning more and more about it myself, I actually think it's wonderful that someone comes back to me and says, hey Karen, I didn't know that this was that this was actually a thing, or that this was such an issue. Thank you for educating me, because for me, that's where the real conversations can start taking place.
Yeah. I think that's that ties in nicely with the point. It felt a bit disjointed if I jumped in with what I was going to say. So thank you. But I was going to say, it's kind of that self-advocacy. You know, you're right. I didn't have an awareness of people that didn't have children either. And I think the difference I've noticed in the journey from when I, had the miscarriage to now is the fact that actually I can self-advocate. And I think that's kind of what you mean. So if you can't self-advocate, then yes, it is very much about going to your equalities person or department and saying, well, do you know what, there is this thing, and actually I would like you to advocate for me and the community that work here. But I found actually, as somebody that went, do you know what, I can't handle this anymore, I'm going to go and be self-employed, that actually it's kind of tied in with my journey about how I feel about it. And actually I can advocate for myself now. So when I first started networking, I was very much in that space. I thought, I know, I'll go to a women's only networking. And I recognize what you were saying when it's kind of like mum to network rather than being inclusive. But actually, I think I've become more discerning and more aware that actually I can go into a room like that and go, and it is the them and us thing, and actually be okay with saying, well, actually, I'm not, and this is what I stand for, and this is what it means for me. And I think part of our journey, and we talk about this journey and it's so multifaceted, and you're like, oh, for goodness sake, Sarah, you're saying that I've got to go now self-advocate. But within a little bit, if you are able to rock up and be you in another space, then why wouldn't you want to be you if you're self-employed, or you've got somebody else that can advocate for you? It is kind of finding your voice again, isn't it, really? I think.
It is, I think, very much so. It would go back to that kind of like where you are and the griefy bit and all the rest of it too, and it's really difficult. I find that bringing a sense of humanity to it can sometimes help, and it can lead to smaller things that create bigger changes. It's can be such slow progress. I think that's the difficult thing. There's no miracles to kind of getting something straight there in place, and the ignorance is huge. Certainly my experience putting together a fertility policy within Cambridge University and other organisations where I've helped with that, just because I will speak out about it, has been, well, why isn't it scheduled? Why can't you thing? And you can't, that's not, you have to kind of take away the business thing and go, yeah, okay, business, yeah, we get that, yes, I can do my job, I'm fine with that, and I know what I'm doing, and I'm a good employee. But actually, I'm also a human being, and this is where the humanity comes in, because this is an issue. And if it's not supported like any other mental health provision and any other diversity and in uninclusion, I mean, this is, I think, the thing as well, is that being able now, because of peer-to-peer training in this, is I can now go, actually, no, this you're not including me in this conversation. And in fact, only a couple of weeks ago, when there was a whole back to school chat thing, it was a case of, okay, I'm leaving this now because actually it's triggering me, because actually on the day your kids go back to school, I have a bad anniversary that is particularly painful. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but there is one. I'm leaving this conversation. You carry on, because it's not including me. And it's sort of like a pause. Oh God, we're not. Oh, right, okay. Change the conversation. They have a choice. I have a choice. My choice is I'm leaving you now because this is too much for me. And I'm not telling you the details because you don't need to know, but actually, no, this is not including. But again, that's a difficult thing to say. And sometimes it's easier to self-advocate later on than it is now. But hopefully change will come as more companies do things. I think one of the things, I don't know about you, Karen, but one of the things that's important to me is that companies who do take this in and do make this part of their inclusivity is that they shout about it, because only by then they start to change other things. So Cambridge University leads to York University, which leads to another one, which then leads to something else. And hopefully as a company, which they are employing people, these people can then actually start to get other corporates involved too, because it has to be shouted about. It's a big thing, and it's a big ask of companies, but it's also something that they should be proud of too, because it takes an awful lot. But how many people listen, I don't know, but it should be better.
Yeah. No, definitely, absolutely. And a question that comes up in my head, Berenice, also looking at time, is we've talking a lot about networking in the corporate space and stuff like that. What, looking at where, well, a question to both of you actually, looking at where you both now are in your childless journey, and also, of course, where you are in your career, in your professional journey, what networks do you now seek out actively from a, well, maybe from a professional perspective, but also from a personal perspective? But maybe let's look at professional networking, because that's the aim, that's the main focus of today. But so, what networks do you have experience with that actually do work for you, or why do they work? I'm just curious to hear.
Okay, I've found that I don't do the standing up at 7 in the morning over a breakfast coffee thing. Doesn't work for me at all. That's the first thing. Off you go. I have found networking in business to be the ones that are more diverse. So there's a very good networking group called Drive the Network. Again, I will put all the details into the chat too, so we can follow it up. Based mostly from my area, but have now, since the pandemic, gone global. Parents are in there, but actually the message is subtle networking. You're not allowed to ask the obvious networking questions like, what do you do and how many children do you have? It's more diverse and inclusive. And in fact, they have been really critical in me actually being able to share my story. I'm openly childless, not by choice in there, but we talk about parent stuff, we talk all sorts of stuff, but it's generally a really nice chat about lots of different things. So I think any network for me that is a little bit more diverse, I might join it, look on their inside them, do a trial membership if I can. If they're on Facebook, then I'll have a look and just see what the tone is like too. If it tends to be a bit more biased in one way, then obviously I'm out. I won't commit money to things until I've actually seen it, and I will now explain to the organizer why I will just try it out first, because it's a big ask. I also tend to find that the more nerdy stuff around design, of course, is much less about parents too. It tends to be more about focused on what I actually do and about books or any design areas. So it's very limited in terms of parental kind of stuff too. But I think anything that allows you some space to breathe and has a inclusivity policy. I think if they've got something on their website that says, look, we welcome everybody, and there's some kind of statement, you can go back, and if you get to the point where you think, hang on, this isn't working for me, if you wanted to, you could go back and say, look, you've got this on your website, but actually I'm not feeling included. They may change and shape it, they may not, and then you can leave. But the difference between being employed and running your own business is you can leave it. You're not there for life. No one's there for life. Go, get out the door, go and give your money or your time, your valuable, important self to somebody else. You don't have to be there forever.
Yeah, very good point.
Well, you're freelance, you're running your own business.
Exactly. You can exit stage left and not care.
You're not going to sit there and do the morning stand-up anymore.
Yeah. No, exactly.
Don't do that anymore, which is quite freeing and liberating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was sitting here reflecting as you're speaking, Berenice, because I guess I've obviously I know about your networking experiences and we talk about them quite a few times, don't we? But I think for me, I wonder actually whether I've been left, and I've got my counsellor head on here, so forgive me for this, but I wonder if actually my corporate life has left me with a leaning that I go looking for specifically networking in those areas. Do you know what I mean?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. So rather than go for something generic, and believe me, I have tried, and it's not been that great, I'll be honest, because what I do is quite niche. So not just the counselling, but the financial services stuff. It's not general. I've sort of landed in there, and then of course they've been talking about that, and I've families and things, because it's easy, isn't it? Oh, hi Sarah, tell me about yourself, tell me about your family. So I tend to go for stuff that is particular to my corporate background. So I do financial services, and then obviously I do the counselling. And I've found actually I don't generally get into conversations about childlessness. Maybe it's the way I rock up, but I'm talking to them. I can talk to them about anything, and I think we're more rounded individuals because we don't rely on that sort of small talk. We're not interested in the family, we're interested in them. And I find that actually, I find this across our community, that people are actually interested in the person in front of them, not all the paraphernalia that sits around them. That's what I love about it. So for me, my networking is very specific, and I rock up, I think, in a very particular way, in that I'm very boundaried, and I am not sharing as much as others would, because you're connecting over that particular industry, if that makes sense. So it's a little bit different. I'm not looking for the policies and procedures. I'm just looking for sounds so mercenary. I'm looking for the opportunities, if that makes sense, to connect over that.
It does make sense, because I think it's the difference between probably what we do. Everyone does something different, because design is very emotive, very kind of led by the person, the audience. It's a very trusting and very deep relationship, but also very driven by the people. I need to go out and speak to people in order to get the work in. I have to sometimes go out of my little shell. As an introvert, I don't like it either, but I kind of have to do that, and sometimes that's difficult. So, but I'm very picky. If you get me in your network, you're flipping lucky, because generally speaking, I don't tend to hang around if I find it's a waste of time or it's not working for me. But it's the difference is, I think, in people. Sometimes if you're product led or a certain service, then I think it's different. It varies depending on where you are. Design is very much about kind of the emotion side and connecting with business owners and providers of things and publishers. So it's very different, I think, in that sense. So it does make perfect sense of what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also do think it's, look at us three. What we're actually doing, and of course we're hosting a webinar physically right now, but we've been connecting. So we've been creating a professional network where we also talk not just about our own personal lived experiences of being a childless woman, but we've also spoke about, hey, I'm self-employed. How do you deal with this? How do you deal with that? Or how should even if you're not self-employed, I've had conversations with women go, look, can we just get together with a few of us and kind of talk about, hey, how do you handle this in the workplace? And so I think it's really important that you find your kind of support group or your networking group where you can both talk about, in this case, your professional experience, because I'm also seeing in the chat that a lot of things come up in the chat is that people are saying that they how do I speak up openly at the work, but I don't feel comfortable. I find it too difficult to share my story. It's too painful. Where do I start? What happens if I'm not being heard by the person who is pointed out as a trustworthy person, or as an HR trust person, or as a company doctor, or as a company counselor, or whatever their title is, but they have been pinpointed as the safe person to go to and to talk to. And what happens if you still don't feel safe? And my 2 cents on that is that if you are still finding yourself in that place, see if you can find a personal network aimed at childlessness, aimed at childless women, aimed at childless people, to find support there to help you kind of liaise, to help you kind of open up to other people in a safe space where you don't have to do anything with it yet, where you just kind of dip your toe in the water of, hey, what is it like if I actually make myself feel heard in a space that is filled with women or with childless people. It doesn't have to be just women. With men and women, there are various support groups out there that you can find. All the resources are on the World Childless Week webpage, so you can find them there. So if you feel that networking in a professional space yet, or speak up in your workplace about this topic, see if you can find a network that can support you personally, or even counseling or therapy. Also, there's a list on the World Childless Week webpage about resources that you can actually go to help you navigate through that. So I just wanted to point that out because I saw that came up a lot in the chat as well. So please do look those up. I joined a network for childless women for quite a while, and I really, really got a lot out of that, to really just kind of connect with my personal story and to actually start owning my story, and to really heal through the grieving journey. I've had individual therapy sessions. I'm still seeing my counselor now. So that's what I do from me in person, and what that has done is it has helped me grieve. It's helped me kind of rebuild my confidence as a person, and also to realize, okay, yeah, I might be childless, but that is a part of me. It doesn't make up what I'm capable of in the workplace. It doesn't make up what I am capable, what my skill set is. It doesn't. So it's a part of me, and I carry it with a lot of love and a lot of pride. But it's not all of me, if that makes sense. So I just really wanted to reiterate that.
I agree. I think that's a really important point. I kind of identify as lots of other things. It happens to be a kind of a line somewhere within everything. And the other thing I wanted just touch on briefly was that storytelling too. I didn't go into anywhere or any space and go, whoa, childless, or own it or say anything about it at all. But what I've found in my setting up Hello Lovely is that gradually I've started to just gently share a few bits about the podcast. Kind of started off actually with the design side of it, but then it started to build in a bit more of a narrative. I do this over here. So if people, my clients, wanted to go over to that place and look over there and go, oh, okay, she happens to be, because that's what the podcast is about. So just gradually adding a few things in, but actually what you will find, particularly at the moment, on all of my networks, is that I kind of separate it all out now. So Berenice Smith is the podcast. I've got Berenice Howard Smith as the designer, two slightly different identities, but I do just share it a little bit because I found it much easier to share words than I ever did language at the time. I didn't want to speak about it, but the word thing and just sharing a few links and popping a few things in, I think really just helped me a bit more. And I will absolutely 100% say that I haven't lost any clients from it. There was only one person who came up to me and said that they didn't think I was qualified to design children's books, having actually designed them for Penguin, Pearson and other people. That's her loss. It's not mine. I'm a professional award-winning designer. I would not have wanted to have worked with her. So I think that I don't lost anything from it. In fact, if anything, I've gained from it too. I've seen lots of people grow within my communities too. But storytelling and gently doing that can be helpful. And if anybody wants to talk to me about that afterwards, then just, you can find me via the World Childless Week page. Just come and grab me. We can talk about storytelling if that helps you in your business. Then it's kind of a gentle way of doing it without, being too kind of obvious.
Yeah, I love that. I do something similar. So even though financial services is separate to the counselling, I still say I'm a counsellor and what community I work with. And that's I kind of see what you're doing. It's a safe bit of myself that I can divulge without going, and here's my whole story. It's such an easy thing. And then I've actually noticed, funnily enough, that actually I don't get the conversations about children. So it's just like, phew. But it's got to be done in a way that you find, I guess, safe and okay for you.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's lots of ways to do it, lots of different ways. I think, Karen, you're right. Finding your feet in a network that's appropriate for you, that's within the childless community, I think gives you the confidence. I certainly came to terms a lot more with my grief, but principally probably with kind of just going out and seeing and meeting other people like me, and certainly the podcast, without question, has helped me. And being with Steph from the start, actually, with World Childless Week, is probably I think maybe the longest serving ambassador. I don't know, Steph would have to tell me that, but just generally having those conversations and meeting Steph and getting the confidence to kind of like just have a chat. And you can practice the lines if you like. You can kind of say, okay, maybe this isn't the way to do it. Maybe I need to think of a different way in, or maybe I need to link it and loop it back to a conversation that includes parental units. So again, going back to that thing about the next generation, that type of thing, but just bringing it in, I think, somewhere and just not filling the thin space, but you've got a bit of a sort of a thin space there to work with. People can be more empathetic. Often we can be driven by what the media think, the them and us thing, but actually sometimes you find that people are more sympathetic than you think. Certainly, I think most of the stuff I've had certainly within Drive the Network, and the reason I'm here is actually because there's 3 parents I know within Drive the Network who encourage me to be here, because actually it's their human interest. They're interested in supporting me as a person, as I am interested in supporting them as people too. It's a mutual thing, and if people don't give you that back, then really move on, because there are people out there who will do that regardless of their parental status. We do have a question. I don't know if we've answered that or not. Sorry, I'm trying to work out how to use Zoom now. So when at networking events with new people, how do you handle the question during introductions? I'd walk out the room, but then I'm like that. I wouldn't spend too much time with that. I'd kind of turn it around and say, could we talk about something else? What else? What's more exciting about you? Have you watched something? I would also probably raise it with the person that's organizing the networking event too, and say, look, actually this is not right. Do something else. One of the things that people have done is ask about books. There is actually a few networking events I've been to where we will ask something about, what did you last watch on the telly? What's your favorite book? Anything other than that, because actually the question is making an awful lot of assumptions, and I think it's wrong. I would say that I don't feel comfortable answering that question. Or again, probably knowing me now, I would just say, I'm going to go and do something else that's more worthy of my time. But that's not for everybody.
I think we've spoken about it before, haven't we? Sort of comebacks and how we share them in the community, because I've had a few conversations about this, and I think it depends on what mood you're in, what the context is, and you know, how you feel about the question on that particular day. I mean, my go-to, and I know I've stolen this, and forgive me whoever I've stolen it from, because I can't credit you with it, is if they say, have you got children? I say, not that I'm aware of, because then I don't have to answer it. Then they're looking at me going, hey, how can you not know? And then there's a pause, and then I can go in and say, well, tell me about yourself, what you do, where are you from, what, you know what I mean? That repertoire, just anything that means you can take the power back and go, do you know what, I don't have to answer that if I don't want to.
Own it back.
Whatever works for you. It's not going to be the same as mine, you know, but it could be something where you go, do you know what, I don't have to answer that, but I don't have to necessarily walk away if I don't want to.
We had a thing on, didn't we, on one of the podcasts, and I forget which one it was, about just rehearsing some lines, just having them up your sleeve, just there, just in case. It's
repertoire.
It's there. I think that my capture was just, I don't feel comfortable answering that. I don't want to answer that question. Just, that's not an appropriate question. Words around all of that. I have gone in and said, my children passed away, which is kind of technically, you know, miscarriage. I wouldn't do that. It makes people uncomfortable. In my angry face, I did that. But I think you always say, I'm uncomfortable, and people listen. And hopefully it gives them a learning thing. If they are curious, sensitive, then I've gone on and explained and just said, look, actually, you know, and quoted some statistics actually from World Childless Week's own website, which is, these are the statistics, this is an inappropriate question. Then you're not necessarily having to explain your own journey, but actually opening people up and going, look, actually, there's a reason why you shouldn't answer it if that's what you want to do. But yeah, you're right, every situation is different and problematic sometimes. But definitely raise it as a thing, because it's not right.
It's a learning curve.
Oh gosh, isn't it? Yeah, I think life generally sort of is. The other question that we had was about networking within the childless community. What's out there at the moment and ideas for the future?
I think we've discussed that throughout
I'll put some pieces in to the chat. But what I'm going to put in, just to let everyone know, Drive the Network it is not exclusively for childless, but it's business one. But the people that run it, Anne, who runs it, is incredibly supportive. If you know me on LinkedIn, you will often see Anne commenting about things, and she's very supportive, although she's not herself. She is a parent, but she's incredibly empathetic and learning a lot too. So there will be triggers in it, but if you wanted to come along, then I'm generally around as well to be a supportive person for you as well. There's a couple of others in the freelancing space too, which I will try and find those whilst I'm here too. But again, not exclusively like that. There's quite a lot in freelance terms, I think, where people go, oh, doing it for the kids. In fact, there is a podcast called that, which kind of is awkward and uncomfortable, but at least they say what they're doing on the tin. What I don't like is when you don't quite know what they're doing. You go into a company, into any kind of event, and you don't quite know what they're going to talk about. So yeah, I hope we've covered everything. You can find Sarah and I at the Full Stop podcast. I will pop that link in to the thing too if you don't know it, but you're more than welcome to contact either of us via the contact form on there, and Karen's put her email in the chat already as well, but you're just more than welcome to contact us if there's anything else that we haven't covered today for you.
Yeah, and I've also just put my the website, I put a comma there, so I'll have to redo that again. But no, so thank you everyone for watching. And I'm, you know, as every time with a webinar for World Childless Week on topics like these, looking at the chat as well, there is so much that is packed up in here that we could unwrap, and you know, we could make it a 2 or 3 hour session, and I'm sure that we still wouldn't have covered all of it, because there is so much, like I said, wrapped up in this topic. However, again, looking at what we talked about today about professional networking, how to communicate and how to find those professional networks, what to do if you find out that the networks you thought you were a part of don't turn out to be your networks. So speak up, make people aware, talk to peers, talk to other people who are in the same environment. Thank you for coming to this chat. I hope it's been educational for all of you. If you want to know more, contact Sarah, contact Berenice, or contact myself through the channels we've been giving you, or even through the World Childless Week webpage. We're all listed there under the ambassadors page with our contact details as well. So I'm just going to close off for now, because I'm looking at time as well, to say thank you all for being here. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here with you who's been watching. If you're watching this on record, thank you also for watching the recording. Do reach out to all of us. And thank you, Sarah and Bernice. Over to you, Sarah.
Yeah, no, thanks everyone for being here. Really lovely to have you all join us and listen to us. So thank you. I hope you got a lot out of it. As you say, if you need to contact us, you know where you are. I'm also on LinkedIn if you want to track me down. That was more of the financial services side of things, but it's there if you're looking for somebody to network with who gets it.
Yeah, I've also popped in the Full Stop details as well. So if you want a safe space on the page on LinkedIn, and also my LinkedIn details too, I do share stuff about design and fonts, but I also do talk about the Full Stop too and World Childless Week. So if LinkedIn's a horrible one sometimes to go into and you might need a bit of help, but I'm there too. And of course, the Full Stop is also around on Twitter. We're very active on Twitter. I'm very active on Twitter, and you can find us there too. If you just need a little bit of support on those networks or just someone to tag, then again, that's also possibly a way in too, sharing something that we've done within your company stuff too. You can go, oh, look at Berenice over here, and look at the Full Stop over there. And again, World Childless Week too are always ways in. But thank you for the hour and a bit of your time. I hope you all got something from it. We really have enjoyed the chat, loved the questions. It's just a delight to be here with you, and I hope that we can do it all again. And if you want to ever be a guest on the Full Stop, or you want something to do, then obviously come along and join us too. We would love to be part of you too.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.